I was 3 beers deep on my back porch when I saw Linda Hendricks marching up my driveway with that look on her face, the one that screamed she was about to ruin somebody's day. The August heat in Ridgemont, Montana, was brutal that afternoon, and I had just finished a 12-hour shift dealing with a backed-up septic system at the Miller Ranch. The last thing I needed was the president of the Ridgemont Heights Homeowners Association darkening my doorstep. "Yates Fletcher, we need to talk," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. Linda was somewhere in her mid-50s, with that severe haircut that seemed mandatory for women who enjoyed making other people miserable. She clutched a burgundy folder against her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. I set my beer down on the railing and stood up, wiping the condensation from my hands onto my jeans. "Evening, Linda. What can I do for you? It's about your truck." She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. My work truck. The white Ford F-250 with Fletcher Plumbing emblazoned on both sides in blue lettering, along with my phone number and a cartoon wrench that my late wife had designed years ago. "What about it?" "It's a commercial vehicle, and according to Section 7, Paragraph 4 of our HOA covenants, commercial vehicles are not permitted to be parked in resident driveways or on any street within Ridgemont Heights between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. I stared at her. "You're joking." "I most certainly am not joking." Linda's face had that pinched quality, like she'd been sucking on lemons. "Multiple residents have complained about the unsightly appearance of your work vehicle. This is a residential neighborhood, not a commercial district. Linda, I'm a plumber. That truck is how I make my living. I've lived here for 8 years, and nobody's ever said anything about it before." "Well, the board has decided to enforce the regulations more strictly. We've sent out notices to 3 other residents as well. You have until Friday to make alternative arrangements for parking your vehicle off the premises during the prohibited hours, or you'll face a fine of $100 per day. The absurdity of it hit me like a slap. Alternative arrangements. "Linda, the nearest commercial parking facility is in Haverford, 43 miles away. You expect me to drive 43 miles each way every single day just to park my truck? That's not my problem, Yates. Rules are rules. We all signed the covenants when we purchased our properties." She handed me a formal letter from the folder, complete with the HOA letterhead and her looping signature at the bottom. "You have until Friday. That's 4 days. I trust you'll comply." She turned on her heel and walked back down my driveway, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper that might as well have been a declaration of war. I called my buddy Marcus that night. He lived over in the unincorporated part of the county, about 15 miles out on a property that wasn't governed by any HOA nonsense. "Man, that's insane," he said when I explained the situation. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Fight it, I guess. There's got to be something in the covenants about reasonable exemptions or hardship cases. You better read that thing front to back. Linda Hendricks doesn't mess around. She fined the Johnsons $300 last year because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black." I spent the next 2 days going through the HOA covenant documents, all 47 pages of single-spaced legal jargon. Sure enough, there it was in Section 7, Paragraph 4, exactly as Linda had quoted. But there was nothing about exemptions, nothing about hardship, nothing that acknowledged the reality that some people actually worked for a living and needed their work vehicles. Wednesday morning, I decided to go to the source. The HOA held their monthly board meetings at the community center, but Linda had office hours every Wednesday from 10 a.m. to noon. I showed up at 10:15, still in my work clothes, because I'd already had 2 emergency calls that morning. The community center was one of those modern prefab buildings with too much glass and not enough character. Linda sat behind a folding table in the multipurpose room, looking like a judge at the bench. Two other board members flanked her, Margaret Yates on the left and Robert Chen on the right. "Yates," Linda said as I approached, "I assume you're here about the truck situation." "I am." "Linda, this regulation doesn't make any sense for my circumstances. I'm the only licensed plumber within 50 miles. The nearest other plumber is Bill Hastings over in Haverford, and he's 72 years old and barely taking new clients. Half the people in this neighborhood have used my services. Be that as it may, we cannot make exceptions. If we make an exception for you, then we'd have to make exceptions for everyone. And before you know it, we'd have contractors parking their vehicles everywhere, turning this into an industrial park. I'm not asking you to allow contractors from outside the neighborhood. I'm asking for a reasonable accommodation for a resident who happens to work a blue-collar job." Margaret shifted uncomfortably. She was younger than Linda, maybe early 40s, and I'd fixed her water heater just last winter. "Linda, maybe we could consider a variance or something. I mean, Yates does live here and it's not like he's parking a semi-truck." "No," Linda said flatly. "The rules exist for a reason. Property values depend on maintaining standards." Robert Chen, who owned the insurance agency in town, nodded along. "We have to think about precedent. What message does it send if we start picking and choosing which rules to enforce?" I felt my jaw tighten. "The message it sends is that you're reasonable human beings who understand that not everyone works in an office. Some of us actually fix the toilets and sinks that you people use every day." "There's no need to get hostile," Linda said. "You have until Friday. That's still 2 days away. I suggest you use that time productively instead of arguing." I left the community center feeling like I just tried to reason with a brick wall. That afternoon, I got 3 calls from residents in Ridgemont Heights. Word had spread fast. First was Tom Bradley, who lived 6 houses down. "Yates, I heard about the truck thing. That's ridiculous. I'm on your side, man." "Thanks, Tom, I appreciate it. Is there anything we can do?" "Like petition the board or something? I don't know. Maybe. Let me figure out my options first." The second call was from Patricia Montgomery, an older woman who lived on Sycamore Street. "Yates, dear, I just heard the most awful thing. They can't seriously expect you to get rid of your work truck, can they? They're not asking me to get rid of it, just park it somewhere else every night." "But that's absurd. Where would you park it?" "That's what I've been trying to explain to them." The third call came from Deborah Wu, and her tone was different. "Yates, I'm calling because my kitchen sink just started leaking, and I need someone to come look at it. Can you come by tomorrow?" "Sure, I can probably squeeze you in around 2. "Great. And just so you know, I'm on the HOA board's side with this truck issue. I mean, I like you and all, but rules are rules. We moved here because it's a nice neighborhood, and we want to keep it that way." I bit back a dozen responses and just said, "I'll see you tomorrow at 2. Friday morning arrived too fast. I hadn't found a solution. The nearest storage facility that could accommodate a vehicle my truck's size was indeed in Haverford, and they wanted $85 a month. Plus I'd need to get there by 8 p.m. every night and pick it up by 6 a.m. every morning. The math didn't work. That was an extra 90 miles of driving every single day, plus the monthly fee. Gas alone would cost me over $200 a month, not to mention the wear on my personal vehicle. I parked my truck in my driveway that Friday night at 7:45 p.m., and I didn't move it. Call it civil disobedience, call it stubbornness, but I wasn't going to let Linda Hendricks dictate how I ran my business. Saturday morning, I found another letter tucked into my door. Notice of violation. Fine of $100 per day, starting immediately. I was given 14 days to pay or appeal to the board. Fine. I'd appeal. I spent the weekend calling everyone I knew in Ridgemont Heights, explaining the situation, asking if they'd be willing to sign a petition or show up at the next board meeting to speak on my behalf. The responses were mixed. Some people were supportive. Others were worried about going against the board. A few told me outright that they agreed with Linda. By Monday, I had 47 signatures on a petition requesting that the board reconsider the commercial vehicle restriction as it applied to residents who operated home-based businesses. It wasn't a majority of the neighborhood, which had about 200 homes, but it was something. The next board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. I submitted my formal appeal on Tuesday, along with the petition. Linda sent me a terse email confirming receipt. Wednesday afternoon, I got a call that changed everything. It was Margaret from the HOA board. "Yates, I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Linda is planning to file a lien against your property if you don't pay the fines and comply with the parking restriction." "She's going to what? A lien?" "She's been talking to the HOA's lawyer. Apparently, the covenants give the board the authority to place liens on properties for unpaid fines and violations. If the lien isn't satisfied, they can eventually force a sale." I felt cold despite the warm afternoon. She'd try to take my house over a parked truck. I'm not saying she'd go that far, but she's definitely talking tough. Robert is backing her up. I'm the only one on the board who thinks this is getting out of hand, and I'm outvoted. "Margaret, I appreciate you telling me this. Just be prepared tomorrow night. And maybe consider bringing a lawyer." I didn't have a lawyer, but I did have Google. I spent Wednesday evening researching Montana HOA law, reading through statute after statute. What I found was both encouraging and disturbing. HOAs did have significant power to enforce their covenants, including the ability to fine residents and place liens. However, they also had to act reasonably and in good faith, and residents had the right to due process before major penalties were imposed. Thursday evening, I put on my best shirt and jeans. I didn't own a suit, having no use for one, and drove to the community center. The parking lot was more crowded than usual. Word had spread, and people were curious. The meeting room was set up with the board at a table up front and folding chairs in rows for residents. I counted about 60 people in attendance, way more than the usual dozen or so who showed up to these things. Linda called the meeting to order with her gavel, an actual wooden gavel that she'd bought with HOA funds, according to neighborhood gossip. She went through the usual boring business, approving minutes, discussing landscaping contracts, reviewing the budget. Then she got to Agenda Item 7, Appeal of Covenant Violation by Yates Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher has submitted an appeal regarding the commercial vehicle parking violation," Linda said, her voice taking on a formal courtroom quality. "Mr. Fletcher, you have 10 minutes to present your case." I stood up and walked to the front, feeling 60 pairs of eyes on my back. "Thanks for hearing me out. I think most of you know me. I've lived in Ridgemont Heights for 8 years. I'm a plumber, and I serve this entire area. When the board notified me last week that I couldn't park my work truck at my own house, I tried to find alternatives. But the reality is, there aren't any reasonable alternatives. The nearest commercial parking is 43 miles away. That's an extra hour and a half of driving every day, plus significant costs. I submitted a petition signed by 47 of your neighbors asking the board to reconsider this rule. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for common sense." Tom Bradley stood up without being called on. "I'd like to say something. Yates is right. This rule is stupid when it applies to people who actually live here. We're not talking about random contractors parking their trucks. We're talking about our neighbor who provides a valuable service to this community. Linda banged her gavel. Mr. Bradley, you're out of order. This is Mr. Fletcher's time to speak. Let him speak, someone called from the back. Linda's face flushed. This meeting will follow proper procedures. Mr. Fletcher, do you have anything else to add? Just this. If you force me to comply with this rule, you're going to make it nearly impossible for me to do my job effectively. And when any of you have a plumbing emergency at 11 p.m., and I can't get to you quickly because my truck is 43 miles away, you're going to understand exactly why this rule doesn't work. I sat down. Linda conferred with Robert and Margaret for a moment, then addressed the room. The board has considered Mr. Fletcher's appeal. However, we cannot in good conscience make exceptions to our covenants based on personal convenience. The commercial vehicle restriction exists to maintain property values and the residential character of our neighborhood. Mr. Fletcher's argument essentially asks us to abandon enforcement of our rules whenever someone finds them inconvenient, which would render the entire covenant system meaningless. Therefore, the appeal is denied. Mr. Fletcher has 72 hours to comply with the parking restriction or face additional fines and potential legal action. The room erupted. People were shouting, some in support of the board, others in opposition. Patricia Montgomery stood up. Linda, this is ridiculous. Yates fixed my water heater in the middle of a snowstorm last year. You're punishing him for being a good neighbor. Deborah Wu countered. Rules are rules. We all agreed to them when we bought our houses. If we don't enforce them, what's the point of having an HOA? The arguing went on for another 20 minutes, with Linda banging her gavel repeatedly and threatening to clear the room. Finally, people started to leave, frustrated and angry. I walked out into the parking lot feeling like I'd just been punched in the gut. Tom caught up with me. Man, that was messed up. What are you going to do? I honestly don't know. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to comply. If Linda wanted to fine me, she could fine me. If she wanted to place a lien on my property, she could try. But I wasn't driving 90 miles a day to park my truck in Haverford just to satisfy her power trip. The fines started racking up. $100 a day. By the end of the second week, I had $1,400 in fines. Linda sent me a certified letter demanding payment within 30 days, or the HOA would pursue legal action. And then the calls started. It was a Tuesday morning when Gary Sullivan called me, frantic. Yates, my basement is flooding. There's water everywhere. I need help now. Gary lived on Maple Drive, right in the heart of Ridgemont Heights. I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said. The situation was bad. A pipe had burst in his utility room and water was pouring out at an alarming rate. I waded through 3 inches of standing water, found the main shutoff, and got the flow stopped. Then I assessed the damage. You're going to need this whole section of pipe replaced, I told Gary. And you've got water damage to your drywall and flooring. You should call your insurance company. Can you fix the pipe today? I can have it done by this afternoon. I went out to my truck to get the materials I needed. As I was loading my pipe cutter and fittings onto my hand truck, a black Audi pulled up. Linda Hendricks got out. Yates, your truck is parked in a resident's driveway during daylight hours in full view of the neighborhood. This is exactly the kind of commercial activity that violates our covenants. I stared at her. Linda, I'm here on an emergency call. Gary's basement was flooding. That's irrelevant. The covenants are clear. Gary had come outside when he heard voices. Are you kidding me? Linda, my house is flooding and you're hassling the guy who's trying to save it. I'm not hassling anyone. I'm simply enforcing the rules that we all agreed to follow. Get off my property, Gary said. His voice was low and dangerous. Right now, Linda pursed her lips. You'll both be hearing from the board." She got back in her Audi and drove away. Gary turned to me. "Is she always like this?" "Pretty much." Over the next week, I got 4 more emergency calls from Ridgemont Heights residents. A clogged main sewer line at the bishop's house. A water heater failure at Paul Henderson's place. A frozen pipe that burst at Jennifer Lee's rental property. And a backed-up toilet that overflowed at the Kramer's house during their daughter's birthday party. Every single time, Linda showed up like a vulture, documenting my truck's presence, taking photos, and sending me violation notices. The other residents started to notice. A post appeared on the Ridgemont Heights Facebook page, started by someone I didn't even know named Rachel Foster. "Is anyone else disturbed by the fact that our HOA president is literally harassing our neighborhood plumber for doing his job? Yates Fletcher has helped half of us with emergency repairs, and Linda Hendricks is treating him like a criminal for parking his work truck in people's driveways while he's working. This is insane." The post got over 100 comments in 2 days. The neighborhood was split. Some people defended Linda, saying rules existed for a reason and sentiment shouldn't override covenant enforcement. Others called for her removal from the board. Things escalated when Marcus called me on a Friday afternoon. "Dude, you're not going to believe this. Linda Hendricks just called me." "What? Why?" She wanted to know if I'd be willing to start servicing Ridgemont Heights for plumbing calls. She said there was going to be an opening in the market soon. My blood went cold. "What did you tell her?" I told her to go kick rocks. "Man, she's actually trying to drive you out of business." That night, I got another certified letter. The HOA was officially placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $4,200. The letter informed me that I had 30 days to pay in full, or the lien would be recorded with the county, and the HOA would begin foreclosure proceedings. I couldn't sleep that night. My house was paid off, the one thing my wife and I had managed to accomplish before she died of cancer 6 years ago. The thought of losing it because of Linda Hendricks and her petty enforcement of a parking rule made me physically ill. Saturday morning, I drove into Ridgemont proper and found a lawyer. His name was Ed Garrison, and he'd been practicing law in Montana for 30 years. His office was above the hardware store, a cramped space filled with filing cabinets and law books. I explained the situation. Ed listened, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Okay, here's the situation. The HOA does have the legal authority to enforce covenants and impose fines. They can place a lien, and they can eventually foreclose if you don't pay. However, there are a few angles we can work with." I'm listening. "First, Montana law requires HOAs to act reasonably and in good faith. There's an argument that singling you out for aggressive enforcement while you're performing emergency services for other residents isn't reasonable. Second, there's a potential case for selective enforcement if other covenant violations are being ignored, while yours is being pursued aggressively. Third, we can challenge the commercial vehicle restriction itself as unreasonably broad when applied to residents who operate legitimate home-based businesses. What are my chances? Hard to say. HOA cases can go either way. But I think you've got a decent shot, especially if we can show that the board is acting vindictively rather than in the interest of the community. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $3,000. If it goes to litigation, we're looking at potentially $10,000 to $15,000, depending on how hard they fight. I felt sick. I don't have that kind of money sitting around. I figured, look, Yates, I've lived in Ridgemont my whole life. I know you, I know your reputation. You fixed my mother's sump pump last spring. Tell you what, Give me 1,000 now as a retainer and we'll work out a payment plan for the rest. I'll file a response to the lien and request a hearing. We'll fight this thing." I shook his hand, wrote him a check that would make my bank account cry, and left feeling like I at least had someone in my corner. Ed filed the paperwork on Monday. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out in county court. In the meantime, I kept working, and Linda kept documenting every single time my truck appeared in Ridgemont Heights. Then something unexpected happened. It was a Wednesday evening around 9 p.m. when my phone rang. The number was local but not one I recognized. "Is this Yates Fletcher, the plumber?" A woman's voice, stressed and panicked. "Yes, this is Yates." "Oh, thank God. This is Linda Hendricks. My main water line just broke and there's water shooting up through my front yard. I need help immediately." I sat there in stunned silence for a long moment. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Mr. Fletcher, are you there?" "I'm here." "Linda, I'm a little confused. You've been trying to run me out of the neighborhood for the past month. Now you want my help. This is an emergency. Water is everywhere. It's going to flood my basement. Call Bill Hastings in Haverford." I did. "He can't come out until tomorrow morning. Please, I know we've had our differences, but I need help." I thought about refusing. God knows she deserved it. But I'd taken an oath when I got my plumbing license to serve the public and respond to emergencies. And despite everything, I wasn't Linda. I couldn't leave someone's house to flood out of spite. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Thank you so much." Linda's house was on Birch Court, one of the nicer streets in the development. When I pulled up, I could see the problem immediately. A geyser of water was erupting from her front lawn, shooting a good 6 feet into the air. It was the main supply line from the street, and it had completely ruptured. Linda came running out of her house in pajamas and a bathrobe, her hair in disarray. "Can you fix it? I need to shut off the water at the street first." I went to my truck and grabbed the long key for the meter valve. The street shutoff was at the curb, and I had to dig through mud and water to reach it. Finally, I got it turned, and the geyser died. "The break is in your supply line between the meter and your house," I told Linda. "I'm going to have to excavate to reach it and replace the damaged section." "How long will that take?" "A few hours, probably." "And Linda, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to require my truck to be parked in your driveway for several hours. After 8 p.m., which violates your precious covenant, so you need to decide right now if you want me to fix this or not." She looked at the water-soaked lawn, then back at me. "Please fix it." I worked until 1:30 in the morning, digging through mud, cutting out the damaged section of pipe, and installing a new coupling and line. Linda brought me coffee twice and stood watching from her porch, wrapped in a blanket. When I finally finished, covered in mud and exhausted, I packed up my tools and wrote up an invoice. "That's $800 for emergency after hours service, parts, and labor." Linda took the invoice without arguing. "I'll write you a check. I prefer cash or Venmo for after-hours calls." Too many checks bounce. She went inside and came back with $800 in cash. "Yates, I want to say something. I'm listening. I know you think I'm unreasonable, but I'm just trying to maintain standards. Property values in neighborhoods with strict HOAs are 20% higher on average than those without. That's not opinion, that's data. Every exception we make weakens the entire system. Linda, I don't care about your statistics. I care about being able to do my job and keep my house. You're trying to take both away from me over something that hurts literally no one. It's not personal." "Yes, it is. You made it personal when you tried to recruit Marcus to replace me. You made it personal when you started showing up at every single job site to document violations. You made it personal when you filed a lien against my house." She didn't respond to that. I drove home and fell into bed at 2:30 a.m., setting my alarm for 6 o'clock because I had a job in the morning at her ranch 40 miles north. The next day, something shifted in the neighborhood. Someone, I never found out who, had taken photos of my truck at Linda's house at midnight and posted them to the Facebook page with the caption, "Rules for thee but not for me." Linda Hendricks violated her own commercial vehicle restriction by having Yates Fletcher's work truck at her house past 8 p.m. Maybe it's time for a new HOA president. The post went viral within the neighborhood. Comments ranged from supportive, "Linda is a hypocrite," to defensive, "It was an emergency," to pragmatic, "This whole situation is ridiculous. Can we please just change the rule?" An emergency special meeting was called for the following Tuesday. The agenda had one item: discussion and potential revision of Section 7, Paragraph 4 regarding commercial vehicle parking. The community center was packed. Every chair was filled and people stood along the walls. The local newspaper had even sent a reporter, a young guy named Derek who smelled a good small-town story. Linda called the meeting to order. Her face was tight, and she looked like she hadn't slept well. "This meeting has been called in response to numerous resident requests regarding our commercial vehicle policy. The board has received a petition to amend the covenant. Before we proceed to discussion, I want to read a prepared statement." She pulled out a sheet of paper. "As president of this HOA board, my duty is to enforce the covenants that all residents agreed to when they purchased their properties. These covenants exist to protect property values and maintain the character of our community. The recent controversy regarding Mr. Fletcher's work truck has become unnecessarily personal and divisive. However, after consulting with our attorney and reviewing the specific circumstances, the board has agreed to consider an amendment." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Margaret stood up. "I'd like to propose an amendment to Section 7, Paragraph 4. The amendment would allow residents who operate licensed, home-based service businesses to park one commercial vehicle at their residence, provided the vehicle is registered to the resident and bears the business name and contact information. The vehicle must be maintained in good condition and cannot be used for storage of materials or equipment that would constitute a safety hazard or nuisance." "I second the motion," said a voice from the crowd. It was Gary Sullivan. "The motion is seconded," Linda said, her voice flat. "Discussion." Deborah Wu raised her hand. "I still think this sets a bad precedent. What's to stop every other homeowner from claiming they run a home-based business just to park whatever they want?" Tom Bradley stood. "The licensing requirement addresses that. Yates has a legitimate plumbing license issued by the state of Montana. We're not talking about letting anyone park anything. We're talking about reasonable accommodation for residents who provide necessary services." The debate went on for 45 minutes. Some residents worried about the slippery slope of allowing any exceptions. Others argued that the original rule was too rigid and didn't account for the reality of modern work arrangements. A few people suggested compromise language, including restrictions on vehicle size or requiring vehicles to be parked in garages when possible. Finally, Linda called for a vote. The amendment needed a majority of residents present to pass. The vote was 73 in favor, 29 against. The amendment passed. Linda banged her gavel. "The amendment to Section 7, Paragraph 4 is adopted. Mr. Fletcher, the existing violation notices and fines are hereby vacated. The lien placed on your property will be removed." The room erupted in applause. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't fully realized was there. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to shake my hand or pat me on the back. Patricia Montgomery hugged me. I'm so glad that's over, dear. It was ridiculous from the start. Gary Sullivan grinned. Man, I thought Linda was going to explode when that vote went through. Even Deborah Wu approached me, looking uncomfortable. Yates, I voted against the amendment, but I want you to know it wasn't personal. I just believe in following rules. I appreciate you telling me that. Linda left quickly, slipping out a side door before most people had finished filing out. Ed Garrison, who had attended the meeting, pulled me aside. Well, that's one way to resolve a case. You got your amendment, the fines are vacated, and you don't owe me $14,000 in legal fees. I'd call that a win. Thanks for your help, Ed. Send me a bill for whatever time you put in beyond the retainer. Call it even. You fixed my mother's sump pump for free, remember? Things settled down after that. I parked my truck in my driveway every night without incident. The neighborhood drama moved on to other topics. A dispute about tree trimming, complaints about a dog that wouldn't stop barking, the usual HOA nonsense. But Linda Hendricks wasn't done. About 6 weeks after the special meeting, I got a call from Tom Bradley. Yates, you need to hear about this. Linda is trying to pass a new rule that would require all home-based businesses to pay an annual licensing fee to the HOA. You're joking. I'm not. She's calling it a commercial use fee to offset the wear and tear on neighborhood infrastructure from business-related traffic. $500 a year. That's targeted directly at me. Yep, and it gets worse. She's proposing that the fee money goes into a fund to contract with a plumbing service outside the neighborhood for HOA common area maintenance. Essentially, she's still trying to run you out. I was tired of fighting, but I also wasn't going to roll over. I started making calls, reaching out to the same people who had supported the amendment. By the time the next regular board meeting rolled around, I had organized a counter-petition opposing the commercial use fee, signed by over 100 residents. At the meeting, when Linda introduced the proposed fee, I stood up during the comment period. This proposed fee is retaliatory and discriminatory. It specifically targets residents who successfully advocated for a covenant amendment, and it serves no legitimate HOA purpose. I have a petition here opposing this fee, signed by more than half of the neighborhood. I'm formally requesting that the board reject this proposal. Margaret spoke up before Linda could respond. I agree with Yates. This fee proposal is inappropriate. I move that we table this matter indefinitely. I second, said Robert Chen, who had apparently grown tired of the ongoing drama. Linda was outvoted, 2-1. The commercial use fee died before it even reached a full vote of the membership. After that meeting, I noticed Linda's black Audi was for sale in her driveway. Within a month, she had moved out of Ridgemont Heights. Rumor had it she'd bought a condo in Billings. Margaret Yates became the new HOA president, and under her leadership, the board took a much more practical approach to covenant enforcement. Life returned to normal. I continued to serve Ridgemont and the surrounding area, responding to emergencies at all hours, fixing leaky faucets and clogged drains and broken water heaters. My truck stayed parked in my driveway, my wife's cartoon wrench visible to anyone who drove by. But the story didn't quite end there. About 4 months after Linda left, I got a call from a number with a Billings area code. It was late evening, around 10 p.m. Is this Yates Fletcher speaking? This is Linda Hendricks. I know this is unexpected, but I wanted to call and apologize. I almost dropped the phone. You wanted to what? Apologize? For everything that happened in Ridgemont Heights. I've had time to reflect, and I realize I was wrong. I let my need to enforce rules override common sense and human decency. You were just trying to make a living, and I made your life hell over a parked truck. Linda, I appreciate the apology. But why now? Why call me 4 months later? There was a long pause. Because I just moved into a new condo complex with a strict HOA and they're giving me grief about my potted plants on the balcony. They say they're not the pre-approved variety and violate the aesthetic guidelines. And as I was arguing with the board president this evening, I suddenly saw myself from the outside, and I realized I was exactly like you, fighting against unreasonable rules. And I felt ashamed. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her she deserved it, that karma was real, but I'd spent enough time being angry. I accept your apology, Linda. I hope you work things out with your new HOA. Thank you, and Yates, you were right. Some rules are stupid, and enforcing them blindly doesn't help anyone. I wish I'd understood that sooner. We hung up, and I sat there on my porch with a beer, watching the sun set over the Montana hills. Marcus called me the next day. Hey, you're not going to believe this, but I just got a call from someone in Ridgemont Heights asking if I'd be interested in taking over your plumbing business. What? Who? Some guy named Paul Henderson. He said he's looking to buy an established plumbing business as an investment, and your name came up. Paul lives 3 streets over from me. Why would he think I'm selling? No idea, man. I told him you'd have to talk to him directly. I called Paul that afternoon. Hey, Paul, Marcus said you called him asking about buying my business. Oh, Yates. Yeah, sorry, I should have called you first. I'm looking to diversify my investments, and I thought a plumbing business might be a good fit. You've got a great reputation, solid customer base. If you were ever interested in selling, I'd make you a fair offer. I appreciate it, Paul, but I'm not selling. This business is my life. Totally understand. But if you ever change your mind, keep me in mind, okay? Will do. It was strange to think that my little one-man plumbing operation had enough value that someone wanted to buy it. But it also reminded me of why I'd fought so hard to keep my truck in my driveway. This wasn't just about convenience. It was about my livelihood, my identity, my independence. The winter came and went. I stayed busy with frozen pipes and busted water heaters, making emergency runs in snowstorms, sometimes working until midnight to keep people's homes functional. Ridgemont Heights had become my primary service area, ironically enough, and I developed strong relationships with most of the residents. In March, Margaret called me about a project. Yates, the HOA board wants to upgrade the water lines running to the community center. They're old galvanized pipes, and we've been having pressure issues. Would you be interested in bidding on the job? Absolutely. When do you need the bid by? End of the week would be great. I put together a detailed proposal, pricing out materials and labor for a complete repiping of the community center. It was a big job, probably $20,000 worth of work. I submitted the bid not really expecting to get it, figuring the HOA would want to hire a bigger company from Billings or Great Falls, but they chose me. You're local, you're reliable, and your price was competitive, Margaret told me when she called with the news. Plus, after everything that happened last year, we figured it was the least we could do. I completed the job over the course of 3 weeks, working mostly in the evenings and on weekends around my regular calls. It was satisfying work, tearing out the old corroded pipes and installing new PEX lines that would last for decades. When I finished, the community center had water pressure like a fire hose and no more of the rusty discoloration that had been plaguing the drinking fountains. The HOA paid promptly, and Margaret sent a thank you note that she posted on the neighborhood Facebook page, praising the quality of my work and my professionalism. In May, about a year after the whole truck controversy had started, I got a call from Derek, the newspaper reporter who had covered the HOA meeting. Yates. I'm doing a follow-up story on HOA disputes in rural communities, and I wanted to interview you about what happened last year. Would you be willing to talk? I guess so. What do you want to know? We met at the coffee shop in town, and Derek pulled out a digital recorder. So, looking back on everything that happened, what's your main takeaway? I think HOAs serve a purpose, but they can get out of control when the people running them lose sight of why the rules exist in the first place. Rules should serve the community, not the other way around. Do you think Linda Hendricks was just a bad HOA president? Or is there something structural about HOAs that creates these kinds of conflicts? Little of both, probably. Linda was definitely too rigid, but the system also gave her a lot of power without much oversight. When one person can unilaterally enforce rules and impose fines, there's potential for abuse. What would you change about how HOAs operate? I'd require more transparency and more resident input before major enforcement actions. Maybe have a mediation step before fines get imposed. And definitely have some kind of reasonableness standard written into the covenants. So boards can't enforce rules in ways that are technically legal but practically absurd. The article came out a week later, under the headline "When HOA Rules Collide with Rural Reality." A Montana plumber's fight to park his truck. It was fair and balanced, interviewing several Ridgemont Heights residents as well as Linda, who declined to comment, and Margaret. The article got picked up by a few other regional papers and even made it onto a national website about HOA horror stories. For a few days, I got emails and messages from people all over the country sharing their own HOA nightmares. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Jennifer Lawson in Colorado. "Dear Yates, I read about your situation with your plumbing truck. I'm going through something similar. I'm a dog groomer, and my HOA is trying to ban me from running my business out of my home, even though I have a separate entrance and only see clients by appointment. They're threatening fines and legal action. Reading about how you fought back and won gives me hope. Do you have any advice?" I wrote her back with some suggestions, including finding a good local lawyer and organizing support among her neighbors. I also connected her with Ed Garrison, who had contacts in Colorado who might be able to help. A month later, Jennifer emailed me again. "Thanks to your advice, I was able to get our HOA to back down. They're amending the covenant to allow home-based businesses that don't create nuisance or traffic problems. I can't thank you enough. It felt good to know that my struggle had helped someone else." By summer, the whole situation had faded into neighborhood legend. New residents moving into Ridgemont Heights would hear the story of the plumber who fought the HOA and won, usually over beers at someone's barbecue. It became one of those tales that got slightly exaggerated with each telling, until I was supposedly facing down a 10-member HOA board and a team of lawyers, rallying the entire neighborhood in a dramatic showdown. The truth was more mundane, but no less meaningful. I'd stood up for my right to make a living. I'd refused to accept an unreasonable rule just because it was written in a covenant document. And I'd found enough support among my neighbors to make a change. My business thrived. Word of mouth brought me customers from even farther out, and I hired an apprentice, a young guy named Kyle who was eager to learn the trade. I taught him everything I knew about plumbing, from the basics of pipe fitting to the intricacies of well pump systems. "You thinking about expanding?" Kyle asked me one day as we were finishing up a water heater installation. "Maybe eventually. For now, I'm happy with how things are." You ever think about what would have happened if the HOA had won, if they'd actually taken your house all the time? That's why I make sure to stay involved in the HOA now. I go to meetings, I vote on issues, I make sure no one forgets what happened. The best way to prevent bad leadership is to stay engaged. Kyle nodded thoughtfully. That's pretty smart, actually. In September, Margaret's term as HOA president came up for renewal. She ran unopposed and was re-elected easily. Under her leadership, the board had adopted new policies requiring community input on any covenant amendments or enforcement actions above a certain threshold. They'd also established a grievance process that allowed residents to appeal board decisions to a neutral mediator before fines were imposed. Ridgemont Heights had become a better place to live, ironically, because of the crisis Linda had created. I still think about Linda sometimes, wondering if she's fighting with her condo HOA over her potted plants, or if she's learned to pick her battles. Part of me hopes she has. People can change, and rigid adherence to rules without consideration for circumstances is a hard habit to break. But mostly, I think about how close I came to losing everything over something so ridiculous. My house, my business, my peace of mind. All because someone decided that a parked truck was more important than common sense. In October, the community center held its annual fall festival, a big event with food trucks, live music, and craft vendors. The HOA board had a booth set up, answering questions and selling Ridgemont Heights merchandise. Margaret asked me to help her run it for a few hours. As we stood there watching families walk by, enjoying the perfect autumn weather, Margaret said, "You know, I never properly thanked you." For what? For fighting back against Linda. A lot of people were unhappy with how she ran things, but nobody wanted to be the one to challenge her. You didn't have a choice, I guess, but still. You exposed problems that needed to be fixed, and now we're a better community because of it. I didn't do it to be a hero. I just wanted to park my truck, she laughed. I know, but sometimes the small fights are the important ones. A kid ran up to the booth, maybe 7 or 8 years old, dragging his dad behind him. "Are you the plumber guy?" he asked, looking up at me with wide eyes. "I am. Who are you?" "I'm Toby. My dad says you're famous because you beat the HOA. His dad looked embarrassed. "Sorry, he's been hearing stories from the neighbors." I crouched down to Toby's level. "I didn't really beat anybody. I just talked to a lot of people and convinced them to change a rule that didn't make sense. That's called democracy." "Cool," Toby said, clearly not understanding but satisfied with the answer. He ran off toward the face-painting booth. His dad shook his head, smiling. "That's what you've become in this neighborhood, the guy who stood up to the HOA and won." My wife and I moved here 3 months ago, and we've already heard the story at least 5 times. It's not as dramatic as people make it sound. Maybe not, but it matters to people. Nobody likes feeling powerless against bureaucracy. You proved that one person can make a difference. As the sun set over the festival and the band started playing classic rock covers, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't experienced in years. My truck was parked legally in my driveway at home. My business was strong. My neighbors respected me. And I'd learned that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, is always worth it. Kyle called me that evening as I was driving home. "Hey boss, we've got an emergency call. Sewer backup on Elm Street. Lady says it's bad. Give me the address. I'll head over there now." "You sure?" "It's Saturday night. I could handle it." "Nah, you worked all day. I got this one." I turned my truck around and headed toward Elm Street, my tools rattling in the back, ready for whatever the job required. This was my life, driving through Montana back roads at night, responding to emergencies, fixing problems that nobody else wanted to deal with. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. The house on Elm Street had a mainline clog, a nasty one that required snaking 80 feet of cable through the pipe. It took me 3 hours, but I cleared it, cleaned up the mess in the basement, and left the homeowners relieved and grateful. As I packed up my equipment, the husband handed me a beer. "You want one for the road? Least I can do after you saved us on a Saturday night." "I appreciate it, but I'm good. Got to drive home." "Fair enough. Hey, you're the guy with the HOA story, right?" I laughed. "Yeah, that's me. That took guts, man, fighting City Hall or HOA Hall or whatever. My brother-in-law is dealing with something similar in his neighborhood in Idaho. His HOA is trying to ban basketball hoops in driveways. He's thinking about just giving up and moving. Tell him not to give up. If the rule is unreasonable, fight it. Get his neighbors involved. HOAs only have the power that residents give them. I'll pass that along." I drove home through the quiet streets of Ridgemont Heights, past dark houses and streetlights casting long shadows. My neighborhood. My community. Imperfect, sometimes frustrating, but mine. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the truck for a moment before going inside, looking at my house, the home I'd almost lost. The mortgage was paid off. The plumbing was solid, obviously. The roof was newer. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, bought with my own labor and sweat. Inside, I made myself a sandwich and turned on a late-night baseball game. The Rockies were playing the Dodgers, a meaningless September game between teams already thinking about next season. But I watched anyway, half dozing on the couch, content in the simple pleasure of being home. The next morning was Sunday, my one day off unless there was an emergency. I slept in until 8, made a big breakfast of eggs and bacon, and sat on my back porch with coffee, watching the mountains in the distance. Tom Bradley called around 10. "Hey man, a few of us are getting together for a barbecue this afternoon. You should come by." "What's the occasion?" "No occasion, just hanging out. Bring Kyle if he wants to come." I texted Kyle and he was in. We showed up at Tom's house around 2, joining a group of about 15 people from the neighborhood, mostly couples and a few single guys like me. The kids ran around in the backyard while the adults drank beer and talked about sports, work, and local gossip. Nobody mentioned the HOA. Nobody brought up Linda or the truck controversy. We were just neighbors enjoying a Sunday afternoon. Gary Sullivan was flipping burgers on the grill, wearing an apron that said "Grill Sergeant." He waved a spatula at me. "Yates, how do you want your burger? Medium rare if you can manage it." "I'm a professional, man. I got you." Patricia Montgomery was there with her husband Roger, and she insisted on telling Kyle the story of how I'd fixed her water heater during a blizzard. 2 feet of snow on the ground, and Yates drove all the way out to my place at midnight because I had no heat. "That's dedication." Kyle grinned at me. "You never told me about that. It's part of the job." "Still pretty impressive, boss." As the afternoon wore on and the beer flowed, the conversation turned deeper. Paul Henderson, the guy who'd wanted to buy my business, started talking about his own career struggles as a financial advisor. "You know what I envy about you, Yates? You have a skill that people actually need." "I push paper and manage investments, and half the time I wonder if I'm actually helping anyone or just moving money around." "You helped me with my retirement account. That seemed pretty useful." "Yeah, but it's not the same as fixing someone's toilet at 2 a.m., you know. You solve immediate, tangible problems. I solve theoretical future problems." Deborah Wu, who had voted against the Covenant Amendment, surprised me by coming over and sitting down. "Yates, I wanted to say something. I voted against the truck thing last year, and I still think I was right procedurally, but I was wrong practically. You do good work, and you're a good neighbor. I'm sorry I didn't see that at the time. I appreciate you saying that, Deborah. No hard feelings. I'm just glad it all worked out." Linda taking it as far as she did was crazy. People get invested in being right sometimes, even when being right makes them wrong, if that makes sense. She laughed. It does, actually. As the sun started to set and people began heading home, Tom pulled me aside. "Hey, I wanted to tell you something. The board is talking about nominating you for a position. We've got an opening coming up when Robert Chen's term ends. You want me on the HOA board. Why not? You've got more credibility than anyone else in this neighborhood when it comes to standing up for what's right. Plus, it would be nice to have someone on the board who actually understands what regular working people deal with. I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Kyle and I left around 7, both of us full of burgers and beer, though I'd stopped drinking hours earlier since I was driving. As we drove through the neighborhood, Kyle said, "This seems like a pretty cool place to live." "It is. It wasn't always, but it is now. Because of what you did." "Because of what a lot of people did. I just happened to be the one with the truck." Kyle laughed. "The infamous truck. It's going to be your legacy, you know. 50 years from now, people in Ridgemont Heights are going to tell their grandkids about the plumber who fought the HOA. I can think of worse legacies." Monday morning came too early. I had a full schedule: 2 water heater replacements, a leaky faucet repair, and a consultation for a bathroom remodel. Kyle and I spent the day driving around the county, working efficiently, solving problems. Around 4 in the afternoon, as we were finishing the second water heater, my phone rang. It was Margaret. "Yates, we have a situation. The well pump for the community center just died. We've got no water and we have a kids' soccer practice scheduled this evening. Can you help?" "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Kyle and I headed to the community center. The well pump was indeed dead, burned out after years of service. "This needs to be replaced," I told Margaret. "I've got a pump that will work, but it's going to take me a few hours to install it." "Do what you need to do. I'll cancel the soccer practice." "No need. I'll have this running before 6. Kyle and I worked fast, pulling the old pump, installing the new one, priming the system, and checking the pressure. We finished at 5:45, just as the soccer kids started arriving. Margaret insisted on paying me extra for the rush job, but I refused. "Consider it my contribution to the community." "Yates, you're too generous for your own good." "Maybe, but this place has been good to me despite the rough patch last year. I figure it's worth investing in." That evening, alone at home, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened over the past year and a half. The confrontation with Linda, the stress of the fines and legal threats, the community meeting where the amendment passed, Linda's eventual apology, and the slow rebuilding of normal neighborhood life. It occurred to me that the real victory wasn't changing the covenant. It was proving that ordinary people, when they stand together, can challenge power and win. Linda had the authority of the HOA behind her, the covenants, the board, the lawyer. But she didn't have the community, and in the end, that made all the difference. I thought about Jennifer, the dog groomer in Colorado who had reached out after reading the article. I wondered if she was still successfully running her business, or if her HOA had found some other way to make her life difficult. I hoped she was okay. I thought about Kyle, learning the trade, figuring out what kind of career he wanted to build. He was good with his hands, patient with customers, willing to work hard. He'd be an excellent plumber. And I thought about my wife, Sarah, gone 6 years now but still present in so many ways. The cartoon wrench on my truck that she'd designed. The house we'd bought together. The way she'd always encouraged me to stand up for myself, even when it was easier to just go along. She would have been proud of how I handled Linda and the HOA. Sarah never tolerated bullies or arbitrary authority. She would have been right there beside me, rallying neighbors, organizing petitions, speaking at meetings. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dude, just saw an article about you on some national HOA website. You're famous." I looked it up. Sure enough, my story was featured on a site called HOA Horror Stories, with dozens of comments from people sharing their own experiences. Some were supportive. Others blamed me for not just following the rules. Most were just venting their frustrations about their own HOA problems. I didn't read all the comments. Internet strangers' opinions didn't matter much to me. What mattered was that I'd kept my house, my business, and my dignity. Everything else was noise. The next few months passed uneventfully, which was exactly how I liked it. Work stayed busy through the fall and into winter. Kyle developed into a capable apprentice who could handle routine calls on his own. The HOA board continued to function smoothly under Margaret's leadership. In December, Tom approached me again about joining the board. "Robert is definitely stepping down after the new year. We'd really like you to consider running for his spot." "I'll do it," I said, "but only if I can focus on making sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." "That's exactly why we want you." I ran unopposed. Turns out not many people actually want to be on an HOA board, and was elected in January. My first meeting as a board member felt surreal, sitting at the front table instead of in the audience, helping make decisions instead of challenging them. Margaret welcomed me warmly. "Glad to have you, Yates. First order of business, we need to review the landscaping contract proposals." And just like that, I was part of the system I'd fought against. But from the inside, I had the chance to shape it, to push for fairness and common sense, to be the voice asking, is this rule reasonable? Before enforcement actions were taken, it wasn't glamorous work. Most HOA business was mundane, approving paint colors, discussing snow removal contracts, reviewing financial statements. But occasionally, an issue would come up that mattered. Like in March, when a young couple wanted to install solar panels on their roof, and the architectural review guidelines were unclear about whether that was allowed. "The guidelines say nothing that alters the exterior appearance without approval," said the other board member, a woman named Cheryl who had replaced Margaret's empty seat. "Solar panels definitely alter the appearance. But they're also an environmentally sound choice that reduces energy costs," I countered. "Are we really going to ban solar panels in 2026? We debated it for an hour before ultimately approving the solar panels with the stipulation that they had to be installed flush with the roofline for aesthetic reasons. The couple was thrilled. These were the battles worth fighting. Not to abolish all rules, but to make sure the rules served people instead of oppressing them. By spring, Ridgemont Heights felt like a different place than it had 2 years earlier. More residents were engaged in HOA activities. Meetings had better attendance. People felt like they had a voice. And my truck, the infamous work truck that had started everything, sat peacefully in my driveway every night, bothering absolutely no one. On a warm evening in May, almost exactly 2 years after Linda had first confronted me, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sun set. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Is this Yates Fletcher speaking?" "Hi, this is Amanda from Channel 8 News in Great Falls. We're doing a story on HOA reform legislation that's being proposed in the state legislature, and your name came up. Would you be willing to do an interview?" "What kind of legislation?" "It would require HOAs to establish mediation processes before imposing fines above a certain threshold, and it would limit the ability of HOAs to place liens on properties for minor violations. Basically, it's trying to address some of the worst HOA abuses." Several legislators cited your case as an example of why reform is needed. I agreed to the interview. 2 days later, a news crew came to my house, and I spent an hour talking about my experience, the importance of reasonable rules, and the need for HOA accountability. The story aired that evening. I watched it with Kyle, who had become a regular visitor for beer and baseball games. "That's pretty cool, boss. You're changing state law." "I didn't change anything. I just told my story." "Yeah, but your story mattered. That's changing things." Maybe he was right. I'd never set out to be an activist or a reformer. I just wanted to park my truck. But sometimes the smallest acts of resistance ripple outward in unexpected ways. The legislation passed in June with bipartisan support. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was progress. HOAs would still exist, still have power, but that power would be checked by requirements for fairness and due process. Linda Hendricks never called me again after that one apology. I heard through the grapevine that she'd eventually sold her condo in Billings and moved to Arizona. I hope she found peace there, and maybe a community where rules were balanced with compassion. As for me, I kept working, kept serving my community, kept showing up at HOA board meetings to be the voice of reason. My truck aged gracefully, accumulating miles and character. Kyle eventually got his own plumbing license and talked about starting his own business someday. "You could expand, he said one day. "Hire more guys, take on commercial contracts, really build something big." I'm happy with what I've got. Small is good. Manageable. I know all my customers. They know me. That's worth more than expansion. You're probably right. On quiet nights, sitting on my porch with the mountains in the distance and the stars overhead, I thought about the journey I'd taken from that first confrontation with Linda to where I was now. It hadn't been easy. There were times I'd wanted to give up, to just comply and avoid the fight. But I'd stood my ground, and in doing so, I'd discovered something important. Communities are built by people who care enough to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. Democracy isn't just voting in national elections. It's showing up at HOA meetings, speaking truth to petty power, and refusing to let arbitrary rules crush human dignity. My truck would eventually wear out. The Fletcher plumbing business would eventually close or be sold. The specific details of my fight with Linda Hendricks would fade from memory, but the principle would remain. Ordinary people, armed with nothing but persistence and truth, can stand against injustice and win. Not every time, not easily, but often enough to matter. And that, more than any plumbing job I'd ever completed, was the legacy I wanted to leave. The next morning, I got an emergency call at 5:30 a.m. Burst pipe at a farmhouse 12 miles out. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my coffee, and climbed into my truck, my reliable work truck, legally parked in my own driveway. As I drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward another day of work, I felt grateful. Grateful for the life I'd built, the community I belonged to, and the simple freedom to do my job without someone in power making it unnecessarily difficult. That was all I'd ever wanted. That was everything I'd fought for. And in the end, that's exactly what I got.